Hi folks, Dr. P here, and I'm going to talk this time about my experience of games that I designed that did not originate with me. That is, somebody else had the idea and I was somehow got involved in designing a game. Now this falls into different categories. The first is a story-based game. My first game, standard sort of board game was Valley of the Four Winds, which was the first game that Games Workshop published, the first board game. They asked me to design it based on ultimately a set of miniatures, even though the game was not going to use any miniatures. It was going to be a board game. The miniatures were called Valley of the Four Winds, and they were quite distinctive and quite Baroque, more or less. And then they commissioned a story to be written to tie those miniatures together. And I understand Dave Langford, who's very well known in British science fiction and fantasy fandom, was the one who wrote most of the story, although there were other people involved, I believe. Well, I was given that story, or most of that story. I think I started before the story was finished. And I had to design a game from it. Well, not surprisingly, this is not so much like a historical game, although perhaps there were more individual things involved. And there was a sequence that happened in the story that I wanted to be able to happen in the game. I didn't want to design a puzzle. I wanted to design a game so people could do things other than what happened in the story, but you could play the game and have the story occur. Now that turned out to be quite a good game, and there are still people who play it, but it went out of print a very long time ago. The second was a historical game, and that is Dual Britannia, which just came out in 2020 as part of a package with the classic Britannia that has plastic pieces. And I was offered by PSC Games, who is a publisher, the idea or the possibility of getting Britannia reprinted with plastic and including another game that was much, much shorter, was just for 2 players, that would sort of introduce people to the idea of playing a very long period of British history, and that was Dual Britannia. Now, in this case, in the end, I only had about 13 months to do it, and I'm the sort of person who likes to design a game and sort of let it ferment and lie fallow and so on and take several years, so it was somewhat stressful. Also, 2-player games that are asymmetric like this one can be quite difficult to balance. And to the very end, I was fighting with the balance and trying to make it better before I submitted it. And the next day I had a triple bypass, but I don't think that had anything to do with it. Anyway, the third one is a case where there was a game designers guild locally at the time, and one of the guys who came said he was really interested in stock market games, and he described a stock market game that he wanted to do. And a couple of times, because this is a relatively not populous area, for the first hour of the meeting, we were the only 2 there, so we talked a lot about this game. And after a couple of meetings, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to design a game. And that is called Manipulation. It is a stock market game with the notion that oligarchs, people with vast sums of money throughout the world, are manipulating stock markets all over the world. And so the changes in the price of the stocks comes from both the buy and sell orders of the players, but also the cards that they play that manipulate the stock market in various ways. Well, that's turned out to be quite a good game, and we had a publisher, and then that publisher found that publishing life was a lot more difficult than they thought, and after a few games, they've gone out of business. So all those turned out to be pretty good experiences, but in very different ways. Thanks for listening.